Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Danny Russell, the new Vice President at the Asia Society Policy Institute. And Alan Kevin Rudd sends his regrets. He's out of town and couldn't be here today. So it's my pleasure to welcome both Alan Leong and Alvin Leong from the Hong Kong Civic Party to talk to us about developments in and the implications of what's going on in Hong Kong and what this means for the future of Hong Kong. Alan is a founding member and the chairman of the party. Alvin is presently the party leader, and I want to thank you both for joining us this morning. I also want to acknowledge our trustee, Denise Saul. Thanks for joining us this morning. The event is being webcast and will be up on our website, and that means, of course, that it's all on the record, so bear that in mind. And I would ask all the people present to do me a favor and take a moment, check your phone, set it to stun so that it doesn't ring while we are talking. Our time is finite. We've got an hour, so I'll just say that the Hong Kong Civic Party is something unique in Hong Kong politics, and Alan played a key role in bringing it about. It's the second largest of the pan-democratic parties in the LegCo and the Legislative Council, and many of its leaders, including Alan and Alvin, are barristers. And the significance of that is that by training as well as by conviction, they have shown again and again that they're committed to the rule of law in Hong Kong and committed to the basic law as the underpinning of that. And for myself, speaking as a former U.S. official, I can attest to the importance that foreign governments place in voices within Hong Kong, defending its traditions, standing up for its strong institutions, and advocating tirelessly for respect for universal values, freedom of the press, and so on. These voices that speak up to sustain and to demonstrate a high degree of political autonomy promised under the one country, two systems framework, and to defend also that framework, two systems. Over the past couple of years, we've all seen Hong Kong face a number of significant challenges. A major factor in the equation, of course, have been the political developments in Beijing, with Xi Jinping as the core of the party and an overall constriction of political space within China. And so, Alan and Alvin, I hope you'll help us make sense of these dynamics and think through the implications not only for China, but more broadly. And on that score, I'm also interested in your thoughts, and we can get at this in the Q&A session about the impact of the stress being placed on the U.S.-China relationship as well. So we will turn to Alan to begin by sharing his views and sense of the outlook for the future, and then we will open the floor to discussion. We don't have placards, so get your question ready and then just signal me when you'd like to speak, and I'll call on you. All right? So without further ado, Alan, please.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you. Thank you, Daniel, for that very kind introduction. It is really our privilege to be able to speak here at the Asia Society Policy Institute, which is headed by Kevin Rudd, who is a distinguished sinologist, and also, if I may describe you, Daniel, as an old China hand. So it is a privilege. As to whether we can make sense out of the situation, whether we can help you to make sense, I don't know whether it is you helping us or we helping you, but we are struggling. I think everyone is struggling to make sense of what has been happening recently, both in China, mainland, and in Hong Kong. If I may begin by asking the audience to imagine, since this is a highly intelligent, intellectual audience, I presume that you all know a little bit about Hong Kong. Can you imagine Hong Kong disappearing from the world map as a place that honors the same values, institutions as other liberal democracies? Can you imagine that if President Trump insists on this trade war, and as a result, China decides that it no longer wants to have anything to do with the world economy as an already integrated player in that economy? I think it's really hard to imagine. But if these things did happen, the consequences can be dire. This is not the first time I was here in the Asia Society, although at that time, when I first visited in 2007, it had not yet been renamed the ASPI. 2007 saw the 10th anniversary of the reversion of sovereignty of Hong Kong from the British to the Chinese. And it was also the 7th year after the accession of China to WTO. Now, a lot of water has passed under the bridge, and at that time when I came, very soon after I had taken on Donald Tsang in the chief executive elections in 2007, we still believed that China would deliver according to the Sino-British Joint Declaration and the Basic Law. It is only a matter of time. But given what happened to both Hong Kong and China in the past decade, between my two visits, such an expectation can no longer be repeated without doubts and reservations. And so far as Hong Kong is concerned, if I may just name a few things that happened during that decade, just to facilitate some discussions later. In June 2014, the State Council published the white paper on the practice of the one country, two systems policy in the Hong Kong SAR. SAR meaning Special Administrative Region. And by this document, known as the white paper, Beijing claimed to assert overall jurisdiction over and perform constitutional duties in Hong Kong. The high degree of autonomy promised to Hong Kong at once came under threat. On 31st August 2014, the National People's Congress Standing Committee, I shall from now on call the Standing Committee, by a resolution on Hong Kong's chief executive election, insisted on Beijing's pre-screening of candidates before they can be referred to the electorate in a secret ballot. Universal suffrage promised by the Basic Law came to nothing. Another thing worth mentioning is that by repeated interpretations of the Basic Law provisions by the Standing Committee, it is as if another tier of adjudication had been constructed above the head of the Court of Final Appeal, at least insofar as political matters, political developments are concerned. This is worrying. And there have been other instances making Hong Kong people anxious that the basic law is being observed in the breach. These included A, the Standing Committee's decision to apply mainland laws at the express rail link terminus in the heart of Kowloon, thus ousting Hong Kong court's jurisdiction. B, the notorious booksellers case, in which suspected mainland law enforcement agents had abducted Hong Kong residents to the mainland from Hong Kong. C, pressure is being brought to bear on Hong Kong administration to pass the national security laws pursuant to Article 23 of the Basic Law that could pose as threats on rights and freedoms enjoyed by Hong Kong people. And D, imprisonment of student leaders Joshua Wong, Alex Chow, and Nathan Law when they had intended no violence while acting in civil disobedience. Now, that much for Hong Kong. And so far as mainland is concerned, of course, we see that the 13th National People's Congress resolved to amend the Chinese Constitution in March this year to make it possible for President Xi Jinping to enjoy life tenure, to blur the demarcation between the Chinese Communist Party and the state, and to restore strongman politics by deifying one supreme leader. Now, these, together with some allegations of China's breaches of WTO rules and bilateral agreements, have fueled suspicions of liberal democracies led by America that China under Xi would be moving further away from values and institutions they have been practicing. Now, I can't open without a mention to the looming so-called trade war. We must register for Hong Kong our strongest protest against our having been included in the list of countries to be penalized for steel and aluminium exports to America under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962. The trade talks just concluded in Beijing, led on American side by Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin and on Chinese side by Vice Premier Liu He, apparently had nothing resolved between the countries. Whatever will become of any trade war between the two countries, Hong Kong must not be affected. When America supported China's accession to WTO in 2001, you must hope that China would accept the same rules-based order for international trade. If America has evidence of China having fouled WTO rules or breached any bilateral agreements, then it should have resort to WTO dispute resolution mechanism or sue China for breach. If America leads by not abiding by the rules, then it cannot possibly expect China to respect the same rules-based order. A trade war would only drive China further away from values and institutions practiced by liberal democracies. Now, if I may end by sharing a few thoughts about the way forward. Hong Kong is the only place in China that has been inhabited predominantly by ethnic Chinese, and yet practices separation of powers and rule of law with self-disciplined legal professions and an independent judiciary. We use our laws to protect rights and freedoms, including liberties of individuals and freedoms of information, communication, competition, and movement. Our laws keep public powers under check. Hong Kong people hold dear to our hearts universal concepts of an open society, fairness, equality, and the right of creative and diligent individuals to excel. In short, all the core values and institutions of liberal democracies of the world are not only found in Hong Kong, but have flourished and are sustained in today's Hong Kong. It is true that Hong Kong has in recent years been under pressure to yield to the mainland system. There's no doubt about that. Nobody can query this statement. But we are continuing with our well-spirited defense of our values and institutions according to the Sino-British Joint Declaration and the Basic Law. Hong Kong treasures its status as a member of WTO in our own right and a separate tariff region and customs territory from the mainland. Hong Kong can be trusted to abide by WTO rules, regulations, and decisions, irrespective of whether the same accord with Beijing's wishes. It cannot be emphasized more that Hong Kong remains a different system in the one country, two systems model, and it will be in nobody's interest for Hong Kong to change. When President Xi wants the world to believe that the China model is superior, what better proof does the world have than Hong Kong for making the case that the same core values and institutions practiced by liberal democracies not only work, but they work for and amongst Chinese people with the pertaining culture and history. I'm here to convince you, ladies and gentlemen, that ignoring Hong Kong is a mistake. Indeed, Hong Kong's significance increases as China rises in prominence and at the historic juncture when President Xi apparently wants to substitute values and institutions of China model for those practiced for centuries by the world's liberal democracies. By making sure that Hong Kong remains connected to the world and in ways the same as those obtained during the British colonial era is not only in Hong Kong's interest, but the world's own. The world cannot understand China without first understanding Hong Kong. And what has been happening here, what China did, is doing, and will do to and in Hong Kong, instruct the world on why and how things are happening or will happen inside and outside of the country, and the course China is likely to take. By ignoring Hong Kong, China watchers cannot watch accurately nor predict with precision. While there is not much America should or can do directly to help Hong Kong's democratic cause, please keep a keen interest on what happens in Hong Kong and to speak up whenever you see something wrong. I heard there had been talks about reviving a China-Hong Kong caucus in Congress, which, if true, at least shows that Hong Kong is back on your map. And I'm pleased with that. And as the treatment of Hong Kong I have asked for is justified on our being uniquely different from the mainland system, it is only fair that America keeps abreast of Hong Kong affairs and be satisfied that our system continues to maintain those values and institutions shared by liberal democracies of the world. On that note, Danny, I hand over the discussion to you to be moderated by you. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Alan, for your thoughtful, informative, but not entirely uplifting comments. Because
I wish you were.
You paint a picture of an important system under stress, and lay out a sequence of developments, including the State Council's white paper and so on, that have put tremendous pressure on the longstanding traditions of democracy and the system of Hong Kong. And I think there are many people who feel that the formula, one country, two systems, is gradually being contracted, and the emphasis is on the one country part, and the two systems element to that is being whittled away. I have a number of questions. I want to open it up as well. Alvin, you're welcome to beat me to the punch, though.
Thank you, Danny, and it's a pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Instead of giving a speech, I think is probably more beneficial if we could start our discussions and we can start having dialogues right away. Why don't we do that, Danny?
Okay,
Yeah.
great. All right. So people who wish to ask a question, just signal me, and I'll ask you to begin by introducing yourself. While you're formulating your question, I'll avail myself of the moderator's prerogative to ask the first one, which is this. I think, Ellen, implicitly or explicitly, you're indicating that part of the value of Hong Kong to the international community is that Hong Kong is the living proof that liberal democracy can flourish in an ethnic Chinese society, that there's no inherent contradiction between being Chinese and being a Democrat, or being committed to the principles of rule of law, freedom of speech, separation of powers, etc. There's another ethnic Chinese society that is also a democracy, a increasingly beleaguered democracy, Taiwan. Could you just help us understand a little bit about the degree to which there is a common cause between, say, political parties in Hong Kong and those in Taiwan, and help us understand a little bit about what you see as similar and different. Obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, but it's my impression that the umbrella movement in Hong Kong and the sunshine movement or sunflower movement in Taiwan may in fact be related in some fashion. Help us, if you would, understand a little bit about that.
Thank you, Danny. You are right that if you want to find a community or society that is ethnic Chinese and at the same time practicing values and implemented institutions of liberal democracies, Taiwan is also an example. But being a lawyer, I must point out that so far as rule of law as an institution is concerned, I think Hong Kong is way ahead of Taiwan. You may know that in our Court of Final Appeal, there is a panel of non-permanent judges. And these judges are appointed from the most eminent members of the bench from other common law jurisdictions. Only recently, we appointed as non-permanent judges the retired chief judge of Canada and also of the Supreme Court of England. And these judges, in agreeing to sit on our Court of Final Appeal, in fact, agree to endorse the legal process that they are finding in Hong Kong, because they participate in the hearing, they deliberate on the judgments. So they are there and the importance that their presence sends to the world is a message that the Hong Kong rule of law is still alive and kicking. So far as Taiwan is concerned, from time to time, the Civic Party and myself do go there to observe them in elections. In fact, for those who are following the electioneering work in Hong Kong will know that in the past decade, we actually adopted a lot of the Taiwanese electioneering tactics in Hong Kong. But of course, the Taiwan people, they do not have this basic law and the Sino-British Joint Declaration as a backdrop to their existence. That is also a very material difference between Hong Kong and Taiwan. But all in all, I certainly think that Taiwan, being the direct, the line of succession from Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the founding father of the Republic of China, ought to take on board this duty to really develop more the democratic system over there in Taiwan, and their experience can be shared with Hong Kong so as to help Hong Kong to also develop better our democracy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Alvin, did you want to comment?
No.
No? All right. So the floor is now open. Please introduce
Ellen
yourself.
Berenson, member of Asia Society. Given that China is the strong man, as it were, vis-a-vis Hong Kong, and given that China is not really allowing Hong Kong to be the separate entity that we would all like to see, and given that I don't really know, but certainly in the United States, that the protests that occurred a few years ago, they were not met with any real action aiding these young people in Hong Kong, doing anything to help. So having said all that, I'm wondering why. I always thought that China wanted to use Hong Kong, in a sense, as its economic place of doing business. And I don't think we really talked about that aspect of the China-Hong Kong relationship. So I wondered what you think about that. That Hong Kong was supposed to be the place where people from China could bring their money and do what they wanted with it, and so forth and so on.
Perhaps I could contribute. Alan, that is exactly what is happening right now, in the sense that Hong Kong is the only true international financial center under Chinese rule. And it has proven to be even more important over the past few years, since the collapse of the stock markets in Shanghai, which took place in around this time, 2016. For any international financial center, it requires a few elements: freedom of speech, free flow of information, free flow of capital, and most importantly, the rule of law. So our argument is, even if we ignore the human rights aspect, which of course we do not, but if we do so, it would only harm China and of course Hong Kong by underplaying or damaging the elements I've just mentioned. Mm-hmm. So this is what we are trying to do, that is to achieve by convincing China that, look, it also helped you by securing and upholding what is guaranteed under the basic law. namely all the freedoms that I've just mentioned, and of course, most importantly, the legal system. But of course, I would be extremely naive if I say this is easy. And in fact, it is not. What happened, as you mentioned, in 2014 during the movement, a lot of people found it a bit depressing in the sense that we have achieved basically nothing. The then Chief Executive C.Y. Leong did not step down. Nothing really happened. But my feeling is we might have failed to achieve anything immediately, but the seed is planted in people's mind. And I trust the younger generation, they had gone through a very significant lesson and experience. This is why we keep trying to do what we need to do. And with the backup of the younger generation, and of course, a lot of Hong Kong people, it's not easy to achieve any reforms or changes overnight. It will take probably a bit longer than that. So, yeah.
Yes, please introduce yourself.
Ken Wasserman, I'm an attorney. Can you go into some greater detail as to what leverage you feel you can use with China in order to retain liberal democratic values after 2047?
Well, that's a long way away. Before we ever come to that, I think there are more important and immediate issues to be addressed. As for the leverage that you talked about, I think I am right in saying that Hong Kong is still the only international financial center of China throughout the entire country. And in such a capacity, Hong Kong is still indispensable. And as Alvin already pointed out, in order for us to stay and remain an international financial center, institutions like the rule of law, like the freedom of information and communication, must be there to stay. So I hope that President Xi will sooner or later come to his senses in seeing this fact that if Hong Kong can no longer maintain the trust of our international trading and business partners, and if Hong Kong's institutions can no longer maintain confidence in those players of the financial market doing business in Hong Kong, it will not be a good thing for China, because then China will have nowhere to go to really seek for an outlet that it can do business with the rest of the world. For example, renminbi is still not a freely traded currency in the world financial market. So there are a lot of things that Hong Kong is doing in this regard as a financial center of China. So if you ask what's the leverage, well, that may be it.
Let me follow up, if I may. Is it necessary, in your view, to have universal suffrage in order to maintain your status as an international financial center such as you are today?
It is necessary. I'll tell you why. During the colonial era, we did not have universal suffrage, and yet we were doing fine. Why? Because the colonial governor sent to Hong Kong was answerable to a democratically returned government. So there must be bottom lines somewhere. Lines that governors during the colonial era cannot pass, cannot trespass on. But now we have sovereignty reverted back to China. And as I, in the opening remarks, mentioned, President Xi is now the omnipotent, almighty, deified leader of the country and of the Chinese Communist Party. With this authoritarian regime, there is no bottom line. So bottom lines can only be drawn in the form of a government fully accountable to the 7 million in Hong Kong. And that can only be achieved by universal suffrage. So that is why.
Sorry, please go ahead.
Hello, I'm Pablo Fuentes. I'm an international business student at Baruch College. So a lot of the talk that has so far been mentioned has been on Hong Kong, which to my understanding is a special administrative region.
Indeed.
What about the other special administrative region, Macau? It's still a large source of capital, and it still has a large degree of autonomy like Hong Kong. So in essence, my question is, if Hong Kong is being affected, what can be expected of Macau?
I am no expert on Macau, but from a very close observation, Macau shares a completely different story or experience and history than that of Hong Kong's. Under the rule of the Portuguese, Macau basically failed to establish the sort of rule of law that we have enjoyed in Hong Kong right now. And in the 60s, during the Cultural Revolution, the local communists, or at least supported by the communists, group of protesters, they basically pushed the then Portuguese government to a compromise. So the system in Macau cannot be compared to the one that we have in Hong Kong. And in fact, Macau, with about 1/10 of the population that we have in Hong Kong, of course, they have some strong voices in pursuing democracy, but not as strong as the one that we have in Hong Kong. It would be extremely unfair if I tried to underestimate their calling on that. But the fact is, the opposition in Macau is far from strong than that of Hong Kong's. So it's a I would say, it's a completely different story. You
see, whenever people ask me about whether Hong Kong will be better, in the sense that things will be smoother and there will be a more congenial relationship with the mainland and the Chinese Communist Party, I would cite Macau as an example. Not only an example, but a very telling one. That the Macanese are much more obedient in the eyes of the Chinese Communist Party than Hong Kongers. They have had the national security legislation ages ago. But do you know what is the result of such never-ending concession on the part of the Macanese? I heard that only recently a bill was about to be presented to the Macanese Parliament, Macau Legislative Council, to prohibit non-Chinese judges hearing cases that would have anything to do with constitutional matters and political developments. Now, is that the way that Hong Kong would want to go? You see, I have always said that we are yearning for what have been promised us by the Basic Law, which itself is supposed to be implementing treaty obligations of the Chinese under the Sino-British Joint Declaration. And in so doing, I have shown no disrespect, I emphasize, no disrespect whatsoever for the Chinese government, for President Xi, or for the Chinese Communist Party. If there's any failure to engage, it is on the part of the Chinese Communist Party to have failed to engage the Hong Kong Democrats. That is so much for Macau.
Thanks. Okay. Yeah, he defers to you, please.
Okay, thank you. This is Lun. I'm a law student and a congressional intern in New York City. Let me focus something a little bit specific. We all know there is 4 special election took place in March in Hong Kong, and I have to say that is a little bit disappointing result for the Pan Democrats. I want to ask 2 speakers, what is the message of this result to the Pan Democratic camps, especially the unsuccessful run for Edward Yu?
Perhaps I could contribute to the background of the audience. In 2016, we had a general election in September 2016. As some of you may know, 6 of them together got disqualified eventually during a oath-taking saga, and I would not go into the details of such. And the by-election of 4 seats out of the 6 took place in March this year. The 6 legislators who got disqualified, they were all from the opposition camp in general. And out of this 4 seats, 3 of them were from the geographical constituencies. That means people could directly elect them. And one of them came from a functional constituency. And that is a very historical creature from the British, in the sense that every profession, not every, but some selected professions, they can have their own legislator. So that functional constituency is of the urban planning and architectural seats. The expectation was that it was slightly easy for the Democrats to grab the 3 geographical directly elected seats. And from history, over the past few by-elections took place over the past 20 years, the Democrats won every single of those by-elections by quite a handsome margin. I was one of them, the beneficiaries of that. I stood in the by-election took place in early 2016. And so what this gentleman is asking is, why did one of these seats lost to the pro-establishment camp? Well, there are a lot of reasons to that, but I must say there are quite a few important ones. First of all, some Hong Kong people, especially those who used to support the Democrats or the opposition in general, they are getting a bit fed up by politics in Hong Kong. Things are, over the past 6 years, since C.Y. Leong took power and till he ended his term in 2017, people were very upset by local politics. And that is why we had, one of the reasons was of CY Leong. And so we had quite a handsome turnout and a handsome result in 2016 in the general election. But since he stood down and since Carrie Lam, the current chief executive, took power in 2016, things got slightly better in general people's point of view. She is a very skillful bureaucrat. She's not as confrontational compared to CY Leong. And that is a very important reason why people did not turn out in the by-elections. And of course, it would be naive if we say the Democrats did not make any mistakes during the by-elections. So we have ourselves to blame at the end of the day. But I am still confident in the upcoming by-elections. We still have 2 seats that remains uncertain in terms of the date of the by-election. But I trust we have learned our lessons. We will work harder to get those 2 seats. But what are the messages from Hong Kong people? I would say things are not as easy to grab in terms of votes from the opposition's point of view. So of course, politics play a part. Local issues also play a very important part. So legislators or campaigns should also focus on the other, local issues other than on top of politics.
Well, I think our electoral system is so complicated that it can't possibly be explained to the audience here within the very limited time. But if I may just add this, since you already mentioned about these by-elections. While there had been precedents of legislators-elect staging protests during swearing-in ceremonies in 2008 and 2012, 6 Democratic legislators who had won seats in the 2016 general elections were stripped of their seats for failing to take their oaths sincerely and solemnly. Now, but what is solemn? What is sincere? It actually took the NPC Standing Committee to interpret Article 104 of the Basic Law to legislate for Hong Kong by writing into the Oaths and Declaration Ordinance things that were not hitherto there. Now, so this is the emphasis that I want audience today at this Asia Society Policy Institute event to go away with. This is something that we take great exception about. How can the NPC Standing Committee interpret or in the name of interpreting Article 104, mind you, during the course of adjudication by our court of first instance and before judgment was handed down? Now, this is something that is very hard to swallow. I, back home in Hong Kong, was asked from time to time by diplomatic presence there that, well, they actually had to write reports for investors back home in order for them to be able to assess the risk of continuing to invest in Hong Kong, you see. And they asked me, well, Mr. Leong, what are we to make of such frequent interpretations by the NPCSC? Do our investors no longer enjoy the protection of an autonomous judiciary that would fearlessly defend the rights of investors according to the law? Now, given what NPC Standing Committee has done, of course, I can't really hand on heart say, oh, there is nothing that you need to worry about. Nothing has changed. I can't say that responsibly. So what I can say to this diplomatic presence in Hong Kong is that, look here, if you do not touch the Communist Party so far as political development in Hong Kong is concerned, you are probably okay. Well, that is what we are left with. Because if you look at those instances of interpretation of the Basic Law by the NPC Standing Committee, they had all to do with Beijing wanting to stifle universal suffrage promised us by the Basic Law and enshrined in the Basic Law by Articles 45 and 68 of it. Now, but there is no evidence that Beijing would want to have its finger in the pie if that pie is a pie that deals only with business and commercial interests. I can still responsibly, hand on heart, say this on the 7th of May in the morning at Asia Society Policy Institute. And that was the answer I gave to Council Generals that I saw back in Hong Kong. I can repeat that here. But those by-elections came about under circumstances that were totally unacceptable. And the Chinese Communist Party is really playing up all these, I would still say, this false premise or false proposition about there being a Hong Kong independence movement in Hong Kong, and to just weed out all the eyesores that they do not want to see in the politics in Hong Kong.
Thank you, Alan. You've alluded to the accusation by the mainland of independence movement in Hong Kong. Perhaps you or Alvin could just say a few more words about the umbrella movement and what it is, what it was, what it wasn't, and whether it still is, and whether it has a future.
The movement was a result of, as mentioned by Alan earlier, the decision made by the National People's Congress on the 31st of August 2014 that really did not give Hong Kong a genuine universal suffrage. And so students, they started to boycott the studies, and they had a protest. And of course, on top of that, there was Professor Benny Tai from University of Hong Kong who initiated Occupy Central. That was a mechanism to try to make a bargain with the Chinese government. And everything started to break out in, that was
2014.
Yeah, September, by the end of September. The movement had absolutely nothing to do with independence of Hong Kong. There was a genuine protest, a genuine movement on universal suffrage, and that's it. So any allegations against the movement on anything further than universal suffrage is, of course, wrong, and I would say is totally groundless. So what happened over the past few years, especially regarding the allegations against some Hong Kong people and politicians on the calling of independence of Hong Kong, I would say is a tactics initiated by the former Chief Executive C.Y. Leong. That is very irresponsible, yet successful, because he played the cards on sovereignty. He knew that Beijing would look at it very seriously. And regardless, there were only a tiny group of people in Hong Kong who supported the independence. But he still played it very well, and he is now one of the leaders, so-called leaders of the Chinese government. So my observation is, if Beijing had granted universal suffrage, or agreed at least, I would say, as according in the Basic Law, if Beijing had agreed to give us universal suffrage, that would not have this sort of calling on Hong Kong independence at all. So Beijing could have done it, could have solved it easily by upholding what was promised to the Hong Kong people. But they chose the wrong way, I would say, or the hard way.
If I may. Please. How can Hong Kong be independent? 90% of our water, of our food, come from the mainland every day. It's nonsense. It is a false proposition whipped up and used by the Communist Party and exploited to its own ends. The ends including the making of the Article 23 National Security Bill in Hong Kong. Now, I think I am actually more qualified than Alvin to talk about the umbrella movement because I was there on the ground in the occupied area every one of the 79 days. I met with student leaders every day in the Legislative Council precinct because I was then the convener of the pro-democracy camp in Hong Kong. You ask me, what is the umbrella movement? It is a debate between the past and the future of Hong Kong. If you ask me what is it about? It is about young people, the next generations of Hong Kong, wanting Hong Kong to continue to be a place that they can make their home, that they can excel with creativity and excellence and fair competition. At that time, I was interviewed by international press, TV, radio, newspapers, you name it. Even more frequently than the time when I was running for the Chief Executive's office in 2007. Danny, what explained the interest of the world about the umbrella movement? I have my own proposition or theory. Now, because there are many Davids in this world who are facing up to the same Goliath, and this David, called Hong Kong, was doing quite well. We protest euphorically, happily. Millions participated in the daily gathering on the occupied site. Not a single shop window was smashed. Can you believe it? Not a single one. We actually have our own community. We have our own conservation plans, etc., devised by the young people there on site. We had a collection of arts. You call it what you may. Right? There are sculptures, drawings, etc. There was even a library at which university professors and university students taught secondary students in the library, just so that they can keep up with their schoolwork. It is that kind of community spirit that you can observe during the 79 days in the occupied zone. Amazing, isn't it? And ladies and gentlemen, one message that I want to leave you with on this visit is that in Hong Kong, we have committed people who are quite prepared to continue with the well-spirited protests for the betrayal of our trust by the Chinese Communist Party. We are committed to continue with defending all the core values and institutions that we have shared with liberal democracies of the world. And I certainly hope that in our well-spirited fight for what we have always been entitled to, we shall not be alone. And that is important, Danny. I already mentioned in my opening remarks that I did not expect anybody from outside Hong Kong to fight our cause, because you simply cannot. But it is important, particularly when the Chinese president is calling into question the practicality and the values, the practicalities of the values and institutions that have been practiced by liberal democracies for centuries. And he wants to substitute that with the values and institutions of the China model. And if Hong Kong is exemplary in implementation of those values and institutions that you share, then if that challenge is being made and Hong Kong is continuing with this demonstration of how they could work amongst ethnic Chinese, then I suppose you have every reason to be sympathetic with us and to at least try to follow what we are doing there. And if that can be achieved, I'm already very happy.
Well, Alvin, on that very eloquent note, I'm afraid our time is ended, and we're going to have to bring the discussion to an end. I apologize to those who weren't able to get in a question here while we're live, although you may have a moment afterwards to respond. You said, Alan, that the world can't understand China without understanding Hong Kong, and you contributed considerably to our understanding, certainly of Hong Kong. I think we're all left with the unanswered question of how the China model will ultimately intersect, or can it coexist with Hong Kong's tradition. But you've left us in no doubt that there are still people in Hong Kong who are committed to defending universal values, universal rights, universal freedoms, and we're very happy to have been able to hear from you both today.
Pleasure's mine.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.